Imagine this. It's the early 2000s and Brazil is on a meteoric rise. The country's economy is booming, driven by a surge in exports, a stable currency, and a growing middle class. Many believed that Brazil was on the brink of becoming a global superpower, joining the ranks of the world's most influential nations. Fast forward a decade, and the picture is starkly different. Instead of a powerhouse, Brazil is grappling with economic stagnation, political instability, and social inequality. What happened to this once promising nation? How did a country with such immense potential fall short of its superpower dreams? In this video, we're going to delve deep into Brazil's fascinating journey, from its rise as an economic giant to the challenges that have kept it from achieving true global influence. We'll explore the key factors that contributed to its growth, the devastating setbacks that followed, and what the future might hold for this South American giant. By the end, you'll have a clearer understanding of why Brazil, despite its vast resources and strategic importance, isn't the superpower it was once poised to become. But before we get into the heart of the story, let's consider this. If Brazil could overcome its past challenges, could it still realize its superpower potential? Or is it destined to remain in the shadows of the global stage? Stick with us as we unravel this complex narrative, because the answers may surprise you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and make sure you watch the entire video so you don't miss any part of this intriguing story. 1. The rise of Brazil. A nation poised for greatness. At the dawn of the 21st century, Brazil was brimming with potential. The country, long regarded as a sleeping giant, was finally stirring. Imagine the excitement. Brazil, known for its vibrant culture, stunning landscapes, and rich natural resources, was on the cusp of an economic renaissance. The world watched as Brazil emerged from decades of inflation, political instability, and economic mismanagement. The government had stabilized the currency with the Real Plan, launched in 1994, curbing hyperinflation that had plagued the nation. By the early 2000s, Brazil's economy was growing at a remarkable pace, spurred by booming exports, a rising middle class, and foreign investment. The world began to take notice. Could Brazil finally take its place on the global stage as an economic superpower? The commodities boom, fueling the economic engine. Central to Brazil's meteoric rise was the global commodities boom of the early 2000s. China's rapid industrialization led to an insatiable demand for raw materials, and Brazil, rich in resources like iron ore, soybeans, and oil, was perfectly positioned to capitalize on this surge. Brazil became one of the world's top suppliers, and its economy reaped the benefits. The country's GDP grew at an impressive rate, and millions were lifted out of poverty. The discovery of massive offshore oil reserves in the pre-salt layer further fueled the optimism. It seemed like Brazil's time had finally come. But as we all know, every boom eventually busts. What happens when the very foundation of an economy is built on the volatile prices of global commodities? We'll explore this in the next section, where the seeds of Brazil's future struggles were quietly being sown during its period of prosperity. Social progress and the rise of a middle class. The economic boom was more than just numbers on a spreadsheet. It was transformative for Brazilian society. With newfound wealth came improvements in social indicators. Programs like Bolsa Familia, a social welfare initiative, helped reduce poverty and income inequality. The rise of a new middle class changed the face of Brazil. For the first time, millions of Brazilians could afford to buy homes, cars, and consumer goods, stimulating domestic demand and further boosting the economy. The world marveled at Brazil's progress, and the country began to take on a new identity, not just as a resource exporter, but as a vibrant consumer market with a growing global influence. But beneath the surface, challenges loomed. As Brazil's middle class grew, so did expectations for better public services, infrastructure, and governance. Could the Brazilian government meet these rising demands, or would it crumble under the weight of its own success? The answer lies in the political and economic turmoil that would soon follow, as we'll explore in the upcoming sections. Global recognition and the BRICS dream. Brazil's rise didn't go unnoticed on the global stage. In 2009, the country was officially recognized as one of the BRICS nations, an acronym for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, signifying its place among the world's most important emerging economies. This was more than just a symbolic gesture. It was a recognition of Brazil's growing influence in global affairs. As part of BRICS, Brazil was expected to play a leading role in reshaping the global economic order, challenging the dominance of Western powers and offering a new model of development. Yet, as we'll see, the dream of BRICS was not without its challenges. Brazil's inclusion in this elite group raised expectations to new heights. But could Brazil live up to the hype, or would it falter under the pressure? The story of Brazil's rise is also the story of its overreach, setting the stage for the economic and political crises that would soon follow. 2. The downfall, economic stagnation, and political instability. The end of the boom, the 2011 slowdown. It's 2011, and the streets of São Paulo are bustling with the energy of a nation that had recently been on an economic high. The Brazilian economy, which had grown at an impressive rate of over 7% just a year earlier, was now starting to show signs of fatigue. The commodities boom, which had been the lifeblood of Brazil's economic miracle, began to wane as global demand softened. The reality was setting in. Brazil's rapid growth had been built on shaky foundations. The reliance on volatile commodity prices left the economy vulnerable to external shocks. As the prices of iron ore, soybeans, and oil began to fall, so did Brazil's economic prospects. Growth slowed to a mere 2.6%, and the optimism that once defined the country began to evaporate. The cracks in Brazil's economic armor were beginning to show, but few could predict just how deep they would run. But what happens when the economic engine that drives a nation sputters to a halt? The answer lies in the subsequent years, where Brazil would face not just economic stagnation, but also a political maelstrom that would bring the nation to its knees. Political corruption, the scandals that shook a nation. As Brazil's economy began to falter, the country was hit with another devastating blow, a series of corruption scandals that would make headlines around the world. The most infamous of these was Operation Car Wash, Operação Lava Jato, an investigation that started as a small inquiry into money laundering but quickly ballooned into one of the largest corruption scandals in history. High-ranking officials, including politicians, business leaders, and executives from Petrobras, Brazil's state-run oil company, were implicated. The scandal revealed a deeply entrenched system of bribery and kickbacks that siphoned billions of dollars from public coffers. The fallout was catastrophic. Investor confidence plummeted, and Brazil's political elite found themselves embroiled in a web of accusations and criminal charges. President Dilma Rousseff, who had led the country during the height of its economic boom, was impeached in 2016, accused of manipulating government accounts to hide the true state of the economy. Her successor, Michel Temer, also faced allegations of corruption, further deepening the crisis. But could Brazil's political institutions withstand the strain of such widespread corruption? And what would be the long-term impact on the country's economy and international reputation? As we'll explore in the next section, the consequences of this political instability were far-reaching and devastating. The 2016 Olympics, a showcase of failure. The 2016 Rio Olympics were supposed to be Brazil's moment to shine on the world stage, a chance to showcase its progress and newfound prosperity. Instead, the Games became a symbol of the country's struggles. The lead-up to the Olympics was marred by reports of incomplete infrastructure, budget overruns, and public protests against the cost of hosting the event. Despite the government's promises of a successful event, the reality was starkly different. Venues were unfinished, security was lacking, and the environmental promises made during the bid were left unfulfilled. The Olympics, which should have been a celebration of Brazil's achievements, instead highlighted the deep-seated issues plaguing the country. The Games left behind a legacy of debt and decaying infrastructure, with many of the Olympic venues falling into disrepair shortly after the closing ceremony. The event drained public resources and left the city of Rio de Janeiro grappling with a financial crisis that persists to this day. How did a nation that had once been so full of promise end up in such a dire state? The answers lie not just in economic mismanagement, but in the structural issues that have long plagued Brazil's development. These issues would come to a head in the years following the Olympics, as Brazil faced one of the most challenging periods in its modern history. The economic recession, a nation in crisis. By 2015, Brazil was officially in a recession. The economy contracted by 3.8% that year, marking the worst downturn in over 2 decades. The situation only worsened in 2016, with the economy shrinking by an additional 3.6%. Unemployment soared, inflation spiked, and millions of Brazilians were plunged back into poverty. The social gains made during the previous decade were quickly eroding, and the middle class that had once been the engine of Brazil's growth was now struggling to make ends meet. The recession was not just a result of external factors like falling commodity prices. It was also a product of Brazil's internal vulnerabilities, poor fiscal management, a bloated public sector, and an over-reliance on short-term fixes to deep-seated problems. The government's response to the crisis was hampered by political instability and a lack of coherent policy, further exacerbating the situation. As we look ahead, the question remains: can Brazil recover from this economic and political turmoil? And if so, what steps must it take to rebuild its economy and restore faith in its political institutions? The path forward is fraught with challenges, but there are also opportunities for renewal and growth, as we will discuss in the upcoming sections. 3. Social inequality and regional disparities. The divide, rich versus poor, in Brazil. Imagine 2 families living in Brazil, one in the affluent neighborhoods of São Paulo, surrounded by luxury, opportunity, and access to world-class education. The other in a favela in Rio de Janeiro, where daily life is a struggle against poverty, violence, and limited access to basic services. This stark contrast captures the essence of Brazil's deep social inequality, a country where the richest 10% control nearly half of the nation's income, while millions live in extreme poverty. Brazil is often described as a land of contradictions, where skyscrapers tower over shanty towns, and the gap between the rich and the poor is one of the widest in the world. The roots of this inequality run deep, shaped by centuries of colonization, slavery, and a concentration of wealth among a small elite. Despite the economic growth of the early 2000s, which lifted many Brazilians out of poverty, the fundamental disparities remained. Programs like Bolsa Familia, though successful in reducing poverty to some extent, were not enough to bridge the vast economic divide. As Brazil's economy faltered in the 2010s, these inequalities became even more pronounced, fueling social unrest and highlighting the need for systemic change. But why is it that in a country so rich in resources, so many remain trapped in poverty? The answer lies not just in economic factors, but in the way Brazil's wealth and opportunities are distributed across its vast and diverse regions. This regional disparity is another layer of inequality that has shaped the nation's social fabric, as we'll explore next. Regional disparities, a tale of many Brazils. Brazil is a country of continental proportions, encompassing a diverse range of climates, cultures, and economies. From the bustling metropolises of the southeast to the remote regions of the Amazon, the disparities between Brazil's regions are striking. The southeast, home to cities like São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, is the economic powerhouse of the country, contributing the lion's share of Brazil's GDP. In contrast, the north and northeast regions, which include the Amazon rainforest and many of Brazil's indigenous communities, lag far behind in terms of infrastructure, education, and health services. The Human Capital Index, HCI, offers a stark illustration of these regional inequalities. In the wealthier southeast, children have access to better education and health care, leading to higher productivity and better life outcomes. In the north and northeast, however, the HCI is comparable to that of some of the world's poorest countries, with children receiving fewer opportunities to realize their potential. These regional disparities have persisted for decades, despite efforts by successive governments to promote more balanced development across the country. How can Brazil hope to become a superpower when so much of its population is left behind? Addressing these regional inequalities is not just a matter of social justice, but also a necessity for sustainable economic growth. The challenge is enormous, but as we'll see in the next section, Brazil's natural resources offer both a blessing and a curse in this regard. The favela phenomenon, urban inequality. No discussion of social inequality in Brazil would be complete without examining the phenomenon of the favelas, informal settlements that have become a symbol of urban poverty in Brazil. These densely populated neighborhoods, often lacking basic services like clean water, sanitation, and electricity, are home to millions of Brazilians. The favelas are a stark reminder of the urban inequality that persists even in the heart of Brazil's most prosperous cities. In Rio de Janeiro, for example, the favelas stand in the shadows of luxury high-rises and tourist attractions, illustrating the extreme contrasts that define the urban landscape. Life in the favelas is fraught with challenges. Crime rates are high, and many residents face discrimination and social exclusion. Yet, despite these hardships, the favelas are also vibrant communities with strong social networks and a rich cultural life. In recent years, there have been efforts to integrate favelas more fully into the urban fabric through programs aimed at improving infrastructure and providing better access to education and health care. However, these initiatives often fall short of addressing the root causes of urban inequality, leaving many residents trapped in a cycle of poverty. As Brazil continues to grapple with these social and regional disparities, the question remains: can the country find a way to create a more equitable society? Or will these inequalities continue to hold back its potential? In the following section, we'll explore how Brazil's approach to its natural resources could either exacerbate or alleviate these challenges. 4. Environmental resources, a double-edged sword. The Amazon, Brazil's green gold. Imagine flying over the vast Amazon rainforest, an expanse of greenery so immense that it produces 20% of the world's oxygen. This natural wonder, often referred to as the lungs of the earth, is one of Brazil's most valuable assets. But the Amazon is more than just a symbol of natural beauty. It is also a treasure trove of resources, from timber to minerals, that has long been a cornerstone of Brazil's economic strategy. For decades, Brazil has relied on the exploitation of its natural resources to drive economic growth. The Amazon, with its rich biodiversity and untapped reserves, has been at the heart of this strategy. However, this reliance comes with a cost. The aggressive deforestation practices that have cleared vast areas of the rainforest for agriculture, mining, and logging have sparked international outcry and raised concerns about the long-term sustainability of Brazil's growth model. The Amazon is not just an environmental asset, it is also a critical factor in the global fight against climate change. Yet, Brazil faces a difficult balancing act. How can it harness the economic potential of the Amazon without destroying it? This question is central to Brazil's future, both as an economic power and as a responsible steward of one of the world's most vital ecosystems. But what happens when the exploitation of natural resources becomes unsustainable? The consequences can be dire, as we'll explore in the next section, where Brazil's struggle with environmental degradation takes center stage. The curse of abundance, environmental degradation. Brazil's wealth of natural resources has often been seen as a blessing, but it has also proven to be a curse. The country's rapid economic development, particularly during the early 2000s, was fueled by the extraction of these resources. From iron ore to oil, Brazil became a leading exporter of raw materials, which brought in significant revenue and helped lift millions out of poverty. However, this boom came at a high environmental cost. The deforestation of the Amazon, the pollution of rivers from mining activities, and the depletion of arable land from industrial agriculture have all contributed to a growing environmental crisis. The effects of this environmental degradation are felt not just in Brazil, but around the world. The destruction of the Amazon reduces its ability to absorb carbon dioxide, exacerbating the effects of global warming. The loss of biodiversity threatens the stability of ecosystems that are crucial to life on Earth. Moreover, the communities that depend on these natural resources, particularly indigenous peoples, are often the first to suffer the consequences of environmental destruction. The irony is clear. The very resources that have driven Brazil's economic growth are also undermining its future sustainability. So, is there a way for Brazil to reconcile its economic ambitions with the need to protect its environment? The answer might lie in a new approach to development, one that emphasizes sustainability and responsible stewardship, as we'll discuss in the next section. Sustainable development, a path forward. In recent years, there has been a growing recognition within Brazil that the current model of development is unsustainable. The government, under international pressure and facing increasing domestic concern, has begun to explore more sustainable approaches to growth. Initiatives aimed at reducing deforestation, promoting reforestation, and investing in renewable energy are beginning to take shape. Brazil is one of the world's leading producers of hydropower, and there is potential to expand its renewable energy capacity through wind and solar power. But sustainable development in Brazil faces significant challenges. The economic incentives for deforestation remain strong, particularly in a country where agriculture is a major driver of the economy. Moreover, political instability and corruption have often hampered efforts to enforce environmental regulations and protect natural resources. Nevertheless, there is hope that Brazil can chart a new course, one that balances economic growth with environmental protection. What would it take for Brazil to lead the world in sustainable development? And can the country transform its abundant natural resources into a foundation for long-term prosperity rather than a source of short-term gain? These are the questions that Brazil must grapple with as it looks to the future. 5. Brazil's role in global and regional politics. A rising star in global diplomacy. Picture this. It's 2009, and Brazil is riding high on unprecedented economic success. The invitation to join BRICS, alongside Russia, India, China, and South Africa, marks Brazil's emergence as a global player. No longer just the land of football and carnival, Brazil steps onto the world stage as an economic powerhouse, ready to reshape the global order. But what happens when a rising star begins to fade? Brazil's journey from regional heavyweight to aspiring global superpower and the challenges that followed tells a fascinating story of ambition, opportunity, and struggle. The BRICS alliance promised Brazil a seat at the table of global influence. With these emerging economies representing a significant portion of the world's population and economic power, Brazil saw an opportunity to challenge Western dominance. China became Brazil's largest trading partner, and the alliance provided a platform to advocate for reforms in institutions like the UN and IMF. However, the BRICS dream revealed its complexities. Member nations, despite their emerging status, had conflicting political systems and economic priorities. Brazil found itself walking a tightrope, balancing economic ties with China and Russia while managing ideological differences. As domestic political turmoil and economic setbacks hit Brazil in the 2010s, its influence within BRICS diminished, leaving the coalition increasingly dominated by China and Russia. Beyond BRICS, Brazil has long sought to lead Latin America. Its size and economic power made it a natural leader in regional organizations like Mercosur and UNASUR. But political divisions have complicated this ambition. The region's pendulum swing between left-wing and right-wing governments has made unity elusive. Brazil's own political shifts, from Lula's push for regional independence to Bolsonaro's pro-Western stance, have created inconsistency in its leadership role. As a voice for the global South, Brazil has championed developing countries' interests in multilateral forums. Its most significant impact has been in environmental diplomacy, where it plays a crucial role as guardian of the Amazon rainforest. Under different administrations, Brazil's environmental stance has swung from global leadership in climate action to facing international criticism over deforestation. The path forward requires Brazil to balance multiple challenges. It must stabilize its domestic politics, strengthen democratic institutions, and maintain consistent foreign policy. Environmental protection must be reconciled with economic growth, and social inequalities must be addressed to unleash the country's full potential. Brazil stands at a crossroads. Its rich resources, strategic location, and diplomatic influence position it uniquely on the global stage. Yet, internal challenges and political instability have repeatedly interrupted its rise to power. The question remains, can Brazil overcome these obstacles to claim its place as a global superpower? Brazil's future, a crossroads of opportunity. As we conclude our journey through Brazil's complex story, one thing becomes clear. Brazil's potential to shape the future of our world remains extraordinary. Despite setbacks and challenges, this nation of 214 million people continues to possess all the ingredients necessary for superpower status: vast natural resources, strategic importance, and significant diplomatic influence. The next chapter in Brazil's story will depend on crucial choices: balancing environmental protection with economic growth, addressing social inequalities, and maintaining consistent foreign policy. These decisions will not only shape Brazil's destiny, but impact our entire world, from climate change to global economic stability. Will Brazil finally emerge as the superpower it has long promised to be? Only time will tell, but one thing is certain. This story is far from over, and you won't want to miss what happens next. If you found this exploration of Brazil's journey enlightening, don't forget to support Economy Explorer by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Hit that notification bell to stay updated on more fascinating stories about the global economy. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you in our next video exploring the world's most compelling economic stories.